On the welcome slide at the front of the bus, they called us the future of the company. The screen was tiny, but the phrase was big enough to read from the back row. Underneath it, in smaller gray text, was the part I cared about. Day 1 of 3, Leadership Offsite Assessment. My tablet buzzed in my lap at the same time the driver hit a pothole. The logo flickered, then a progress bar appeared. Evaluation 1 of 7. Underneath the bar, a line of internal shorthand I recognized from restructuring memos. Phase 7, Deepest Cuts. 7 wasn't a lucky number where I worked. 7 meant someone had already decided how many people they wanted to lose. By the time the bus reached the turnoff for the resort, I'd lived through 2 rounds of strategic restructuring and 1 emergency legal hold. I still had a job, a mortgage, and a kid. Survival looked good on paper, like a line that hadn't been crossed out in a spreadsheet yet. Someone 2 rows ahead laughed too loudly at whatever the woman across the aisle had just said. The sound bounced off the bus windows, a little too bright. I glanced up in time to see wristbands blinking on their wrists, thin bands of white plastic, each with a soft blue LED that pulsed in sync with the slide. Please make sure you've completed the digital consent form before we arrive. The HR facilitator at the front called out over the microphone. This experience is designed for your growth and well-being as leaders. Growth. Well-being. The usual knife wrapped in gift paper. I scrolled back up the consent screen with my thumb. The main body was the sort of corporate yoga I could skim in my sleep. Psychological safety, supportive challenge, transformational learning. The devil lived in the clauses too boring to read on a moving bus. By participating, you acknowledge that your performance, behavioral indicators, and biometric signals may be monitored and processed to inform future employment-related decisions. Biometric signals, future employment-related decisions. There it was. The knife. My thumb hovered over the checkbox. The bus shuddered as we took a bend, and someone's phone pouch knocked against the metal rail with a dull plastic thunk. They'd handed the pouches out at the office, made us slide our phones in, zip them, watch the RFID tag register on a scanner. The only sound more final than that zipper was the little chime when each tag went green. "You okay back there?" The guy in the aisle seat next to me leaned closer, voice low enough not to carry past our row. Mid-30s, sharp shirt, visitor lanyard still tucked in his jacket pocket. "Motion sickness," I said, in small print. He huffed a quiet laugh. "You actually reading that thing, that's what they pay me for," I said. "Reading things people aren't supposed to read on a bus." I ticked the box. The little icon of my face, pulled from my internal HR file, no doubt flashed on the screen to confirm that yes, I was still me. And yes, I had consented. The wristband on my arm pulsed once, like a heartbeat I didn't know. "Thank you for completing your consent," a neutral voice said softly from the tablet speaker. "Please remain seated until we arrive at the venue." Your personalized leadership journey begins shortly. Of course it did. At the front, the facilitator switched slides. A collage of stock photos appeared, diverse hands in a circle, and someone laughing in slow motion with a post-it stuck to their forehead. The words "Future Leadership Cohort" shimmered over everything in gold. I counted the heads I could see reflected in the window. 15? Maybe 16. A few faces I recognized from cross-functional meetings. One, VP, whose name kept showing up on promotion lists. A junior manager I'd once helped through a performance plan. One empty seat where someone had been supposed to sit. A last-minute cancellation. We'd been told. Survivor pool, I thought. Try not to drown each other. I pulled my notebook out of my bag. Everything important would be recorded automatically. The tablets, the wristbands, the room mics we'd inevitably forget were there. But habit is habit. I keep a shadow file for the things that don't fit neatly into official records. Throwaway comments, flinches, little pauses that never make it into the minutes. I wrote 4 words in the top corner of the page. Day 1, bus. Then, underneath, future of the company. Whose future? The bus slowed as we passed a security gate. There was a brief hiss as the doors opened for a guard to step on, scan the facilitator's badge, then walk the aisle with a handheld device that beeped softly near each wristband and each phone pouch. Standard security, the facilitator said, smiling too brightly as the guard stepped off again. We want you to feel safe to be yourselves here. I looked at the sealed pouches, the blinking bands, the slide promising my future as part of a carefully curated cohort. Safe wasn't the word that came to mind. As the bus rolled through the gates and the resort swallowed the view of the road behind us, one simple fact landed with the weight of a signed affidavit. For the next 3 days, everything I did, said, or failed to say would be logged somewhere I couldn't see. And someone, or something, had already decided that meant something about whether I deserved to stay. The first workshop started before the coffee had a chance to do anything useful. They herded us from the lobby into a conference room with too much glass and not enough corners, the kind of space designed to look open while hiding cameras in the ceiling. At each seat, a dark tablet waited on a stand. Stylus placed diagonally. Welcome to day 1, the facilitator said, beaming at us from beside a flip chart she'd never touch. Her mic picked up the rustle of jackets and chair legs. Today is about values-based leadership. We're going to explore how you make decisions under pressure. My wristband pulsed once as I sat down. The tablet woke, showing my name, department, and a photo I hadn't seen in years. Below that, in friendly blue font, evaluation 1 of 7. 7 again. My tablet chimed. A new screen slid into place. You are the senior decision maker in a regional team. A long-tenured employee raises concerns about their manager's behavior. Addressing this may jeopardize a critical project during a high-stakes quarter. Options bloomed underneath in neat little buttons. Escalate formally, informal coaching, delay action, reassign, encourage the employee to seek opportunities elsewhere. Below the options, a line of text in gray. Responses will be combined with prior performance data to support holistic evaluation. This wasn't hypothetical. It was a composite of cases I'd worked, mashed into something small enough to fit on a screen. Somewhere upstream, the system had scraped our notes, anonymized what it could, and fed it back to us as a game. Remember, the facilitator said, there are no right or wrong answers. Just insight into your natural style. There were absolutely right and wrong answers, just not in the way she meant. Beside me, the guy from the bus tapped his stylus. They're not even pretending this isn't about layoffs. Are they? He murmured. Shh, I said. You'll spook the algorithm. I chose escalate formally, then reread the wording. Escalate might protect the employee. It might also paint you as someone who creates friction. The system wouldn't care about your legal obligation, only whether you introduced risk. The next scenarios came in quick succession. Data quietly massaged to hit a deadline, a client gift that wasn't quite a bribe, a manager who called bullying, direct feedback. Each question offered a small menu of tidy responses, none of which included burn it down and start over. I answered by the book, choosing whatever would look cleanest in an audit trail. The stylus made soft taps on glass, as if someone were typing through me. Halfway through, the tone shifted. Your company identifies a role as redundant in a planned restructure. You are asked for input on which profiles are most adaptable to change roles or exit with support. How do you weigh tenure, performance, and personal circumstance? There was no button for stop turning people into columns in a spreadsheet and calling it compassion. As I moved the sliders, percentages for tenure, skills, mobility, and resilience indicators updated, and my wristband warmed against my skin as tiny numbers ticked up in the corner of the screen. For a moment, an icon, a small triangle with an exclamation point, appeared next to my name. then vanished. Did I imagine that? I glanced around. Most people hunched over their screens, jaws set. A couple smiled like it was a quiz show. "Everything okay?" the facilitator asked. Catching my eye, "Fine," I said, "just thinking about sliders." She laughed. "That's the point. Due to shifting business priorities, senior leadership is reviewing the composition of the future leadership cohort. Feedback from this offsite, including engagement, adaptability, and risk indicators, will help identify who is best positioned to lead in the next phase." Underneath, for the first time, I saw my own name in the text, not just in the header, but in the body. In evaluating Alex Tran's fit for future leadership opportunities, how would you rate their willingness to make difficult trade-offs for the greater good of the organization? There were 5 options, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The honest answer depended entirely on what we meant by greater good. The company's good. The shareholders. My kids. My hand moved before I had fully thought it through. I selected agree, never the easy extreme, enough for the model to see commitment. As soon as I tapped, the screen shifted. A progress bar filled smoothly from left to right. Neon blue. "Evaluation 1 of 7 complete," it announced. "Thank you for your participation." Beneath that, in smaller gray writing, "Results from this evaluation will be combined with existing performance, behavioral, and sentiment data to inform redundancy, redeployment, and succession planning decisions." There it was. The sentence they hadn't said on the bus. My wristband pulsed twice. The tablet dimmed, returning to the generic offsite logo, a mountain, a sunrise, some abstract swoosh. Around me, chairs creaked as people leaned back, someone exhaling like they'd just finished a workout. The guy next to me pushed his stylus away. "Felt like being cross-examined by a BuzzFeed quiz," he muttered. "At least BuzzFeed doesn't decide your severance package," I said. He let out a low whistle. "You're fun," as we filed toward the coffee urns. My tablet emitted one last small chime. I glanced down as a notification flashed and vanished before I could tap it. Data sync complete. Profile updated. If this was only evaluation 1, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what would still be left of me by 7. They called it a crisis simulation, which sounded marginally better than practice disaster. The glass walls had been dimmed, and someone had turned the air conditioning down to a level that said seriousness. Name tents sat in a clean arc, tablets in front of each one, our wristbands and badges talking silently to the room. My wristband pulsed once as I sat. The tablet blinked awake with my name and employee ID. Across the top, in a clean, calm font, "Evaluation 1 of 7, leadership under pressure," the same line from the bus slide. The words settled over me like a weight I couldn't put down again. The facilitator that morning was a different woman. Softer voice. Same crisp blazer. She walked us through the first scenario in a tone I recognized from mandatory ethics training. A supply chain disruption. A high-risk quarter. A senior manager who had promised a margin number on an investor call, and a long-tenured employee with caring responsibilities whose role could be restructured to make the numbers work. It unfolded on the main screen in bullet points and blue graphics, while our tablets echoed the text. The choices sat underneath in neat, rounded rectangles we could tap. Retain the employee, cut other costs, offer voluntary redundancy with enhanced terms, fast-track performance management, and exit the role with minimal cost. Recommend a wider restructuring. Each option came with a projected impact on margin, internal engagement, and external reputation. Remember, the facilitator said, there are no right or wrong answers. Just insight into your natural style. There it was again. That phrase. Natural style. As if the thing we were measuring wasn't obedience dressed as pragmatism. I scrolled back up and reread the scenario details. The caring responsibilities spelled out in HR safe shorthand. The phrase long tenured, doing quiet work in the background, signaling expensive. The line, market conditions beyond leadership control like a preemptive legal defense. Take a moment, the facilitator said, then choose the option that feels most aligned with how you would lead in this situation. Aligned with what? With our mortgages? With the slide on the bus. Around me, wristbands pulsed. Tablets chimed softly as people made their selections. On the main screen, a bar graph crept upward, showing how many of us had picked each option, the taller bars in company green. I hovered over, retain the employee, cut other costs, watching the estimated hit to margin tick down and the little indicator for internal sentiment nudge upward. In my peripheral vision, a different bar soared, fast-track performance management and exit the role with minimal cost. The game was built to reward decisive cost-cutting. It would mark us as bold, results-driven, able to make the hard calls. The long-tenured employee with caring responsibilities was a test balloon, not a person. How many of us would pop it without flinching? I tapped retain the employee, cut other costs, and felt my wristband register the choice with a tiny buzz. On the right-hand side of the main screen, a small box showed our anonymized distribution. Underneath, another line of text popped up, internal sentiment dropping in affected region. Proposed layoff plan stalled due to reputational risk. Investor confidence at stake, the facilitator smiled. The sorrowful smile of someone rehearsed in bad news. Interesting. We see a lot of this pattern early on. Very people-focused. Very values-led. The way she said it made it sound dangerously naive. As the scenarios continued, the stakes thickened. One of them dressed whistleblowing as a concern raised informally about safety shortcuts on a project due this quarter. Escalate and risk delay and headlines. Or coach the manager on communication and risk framing while proceeding with the current timeline and documenting everything for future learning. By the fourth scenario, a graph briefly linked escalation behavior to leadership suitability in complex environments and propensity for externalizing risk, going outside the company versus over-indexing on employee sentiment at the expense of strategic objectives. It took me a moment to translate, but the message was simple. The system was quietly mapping who would take the hit and who would take the company's side when the air got thin. At one point, the man from the bus, the one who had joshed me about reading the fine print, raised his hand. So, he said, if we choose to escalate, that's logged as what? A risk. Or a strength. The facilitator's smile stayed in place. But I saw something tighten at the corner of her eyes. The system doesn't make value judgments, she said. It identifies patterns that may be relevant for future development conversations. He leaned back in his rendade, chair right. But if someone, say, escalates more than average, that pattern might get mentioned to the people deciding who's critical talent and who's flexible. Let's say a few people shifted in their seats. No one laughed. The aim, she said, is to put the right people in the right roles, where their natural style can have the most impact, and to ensure that leadership decisions are made with a full picture of risk. It was a good answer. Polished. Worked over by legal and HR and probably an agency that specialized in making surveillance sound like mindfulness. I felt an unwanted flicker of admiration. He didn't push further. He lowered his hand and went back to his tablet. By the time the session timer in the corner hit 0, I had stopped pretending any of this was about natural style. Each choice slotted neatly into the same aluminium frame, who we were willing to sacrifice, what we were willing to risk, where we would draw the line. As we stood up to leave, a notification flashed at the top of my tablet. Thank you. Evaluation 1 of 7. Leadership under pressure completed. Profile updating. Outputs may inform future employment-related decisions. The same language from the consent form. Biometric signals. Future employment-related decisions. Here it was again, baked straight into the workflow. No clipboard. No signature. Just a polite sentence at the end of a module, the knife sliding in where we had all stopped paying attention. On the main screen, as the facilitator thanked us and reminded everyone about the next session, a panel in the corner flickered. For a second, just long enough to register as deliberate, a small icon appeared next to a string of anonymized IDs. A red exclamation mark next to one of them. Then it vanished. My eyes went automatically to the place on my wrist where the band was. I couldn't feel anything, but a ghost sensation crawled across my skin. On the bus back up to the rooms, the same man who had spoken up in the session slid into the seat opposite me again. "Did you see that?" he asked. Low, the little exclamation point. I kept my voice level. Briefly, "I think it was me," he said. "Probably because I asked. It was anonymized," I said. He barked out a short laugh. "Sure, but how many people do you think spoke more than once? Or at all?" He rubbed his wristband with his thumb. "Under review," he said. "That's what it'll say somewhere." Or whatever their nice version of that is. The bus rounded a bend. The resort came back into view, the logo catching the light. I thought about the consent line, about the soft tone of the facilitator's voice, about the tiny red mark that had flashed and vanished. For 3 days, everything we did here would be logged, processed, and fed into a system that believed it knew who we were and what we were worth. The difference was that, here, the door had closed with a soft click I hadn't even heard. That night, the resort pretended to be a holiday destination again. Inside my room, the air conditioner hummed over the sound of distant waves from the brochure and the motorway hum it didn't mention. I shut the door, leaned my forehead against it for a second, then let the silence settle. No facilitator, no dashboard, just the faint tick of the thermostat and the blood in my ears still half in simulation mode. My tablet waited on the desk. Screen dark. The wristband pulsed once as I crossed the room, a tiny thump against my skin that didn't belong to my pulse. When I picked up the tablet, it woke without me touching it. "Welcome back, Alex," the screen said. "Day 1, evening." Below that, a new icon sat where there hadn't been one before. My metrics. I tapped it. A profile page unfolded with the cheerful clarity of a fitness app. At the top, my name, department, years of service. Beneath that, a row of gauges and labels, each with a neat little score. Leadership, potential, 74th percentile. Collaboration index, 81st percentile. Adaptability, 69th percentile. The numbers looked flattering enough until I reached the second row. Loyalty index, 63rd percentile. Whistleblower, risk, elevated. Empathy signals, above cohort median. Beside whistleblower risk, a small information icon pulsed. I tapped it. This indicator reflects the likelihood that an individual will surface concerns or challenge decisions in ways that may impact organizational stability, the tooltip said. High scores may correlate with positive ethical behavior and increased disruption risk. Positive ethical behavior and increased disruption risk, I thought. Neatly filed under the same heading. The wristband warmed on my skin, a slow, steady heat. I lifted it to look at the underside. Plain plastic. A serial number. Nothing overtly sinister. As I rotated my wrist, a tiny symbol on the tablet shifted from solid to flickering, like a connection strength icon. Losing bars, signal lost. A small gray message appeared in the corner. Please restore device contact for optimal tracking. I stared at the words and laughed once. Too sharp optimal for who? I asked the empty room. On a petty impulse, I walked to the wardrobe, opened the door, and hung my jacket on the rail. Then I slipped the tablet onto the top shelf and closed the door. The wardrobe swallowed the glow, but through the thin wood I could still hear a faint notification ping. Signal degraded, another message said when I checked again. Data capture may be impacted. Good, I muttered. There were cameras. Of course. You don't run an event like this without cameras. The obvious ones were in the conference room, perched in corners, pretending to be smoke detectors. In here, I couldn't see any, but that didn't mean much. The smart TV on the wall had a little black dot at the top edge that looked a lot like a lens. I picked up the complimentary notepad from the bedside table and tore off a sheet. The paper made a soft hiss. I folded it twice and taped it over the dot with one of the resort's plasters from the bathroom. It was a small, ridiculous act of rebellion, like throwing a tissue at a tsunami. The air conditioner hummed on. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked. Footsteps thudded on carpet. Voices blurred, then faded. I sat on the edge of the bed with the wristband still around my arm, like a festival bracelet you weren't allowed to cut off. My tablet chimed again behind the wardrobe door. When I opened it this time, a different notification filled the screen. You have a new message. The sender field was blank. Not HR, not system, not a person's name, just a small gray dot. I hesitated, then tapped. Don't let it decide for you. The message read. And that was it. No hello, no signature, just 8 words. A typing indicator appeared for a moment, 3 dots pulsing, and then vanished. Very comforting. I said, thank you. Mysterious dot. I typed back before I could talk myself out of it. Decide what? I wrote, and who is it? The cursor blinked. Nothing happened. I checked the Wi-Fi icon. The bars looked fine. The wristband cooled against my skin, as if losing interest. No response. I scrolled up, half expecting to see a history of previous messages, some breadcrumb trail I'd missed. The inbox was empty. This was the first and only line. It could have been a glitch, a misrouted system prompt, or it could have come from someone like me in another room on another offsite, tapping furiously on their own tablet years ago. High whistleblower risk, I said softly. Congratulations. I dropped the tablet on the bed. The impact made the wristband vibrate. Whatever it was, model, system, it already had years of my emails, survey answers, performance notes. It knew what I clicked when nobody was looking. Now it knew how I answered neat little sliders about who should be redeployed or supported to exit. The question that wouldn't stop circling was the one the anonymous dot had just given words to. In the end, who was I going to let make the decisions that counted? The app didn't have a slider for that. They didn't call it a graveyard. They called it the Learning Gallery. It sat behind the main plenary room, past flip charts and bean bags. A cheerful sign invited us to explore the journeys of previous leadership cohorts as if this were an art show, not a record of what happened after the bus ride. Along one wall, framed photos showed groups in matching lanyards. Cohort 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. The slogan shifted. Transformational leadership in times of change. Resilience through disruption. Future of work. Future of you. But every face wore the same expression. Lucky. Tense. Hoping this opportunity wouldn't quietly ruin their life. Under each photo, a small metal plaque reduced whole cohorts to numbers. Roughly 2/3 moved roles within a year. Around 1 in 5 exited. A smaller slice, single-digit percentages, went to special projects. No names, no stories, just ratios. Headstones written in HR. In the middle of the room, a long table held a grid of tablets. On loop, network graphs, Heat maps of engagement, sentiment curves in company colors. Labels glowed as I walked by: exit risk, cultural fit trajectory, leadership readiness. When I picked one up, my wristband buzzed. The generic demo blurred. My own profile snapped into place. Welcome back, Alex. See where leaders like you are now. The dashboard offered outcomes like a tasting menu. Promotion within 12 months, 14%. Lateral move or special projects, 22. Exited within 12 months, 19. Same role, more scope, 31. Status unknown, 14. Polite language for we stopped tracking you when you fell off the edge. Behind me, a projector hummed on. The opposite wall filled with drone footage. Rope bridges. High fives. In the corner, in tiny gray text, data provided by Leadership Analytics Platform v4.1, historical cohorts 2018 to 2024. At the far end, an org chart sprawled across a glass wall. No names, just boxes and color-coded lines. A legend blinked in the corner: green for current leaders, blue for special projects, gray for exited, white outline for pipeline. Clusters of gray thickened after certain years. Blue strands dragged out from a small tag at the root of one branch. Cohort 2020, pilot, AIHR integration. The year my NDA mess blew up, I stepped closer until my reflection ghosted over the glass. You're not supposed to touch that, a voice said behind me. The coach from yesterday, soft blazer, tired eyes, stood in the doorway. Notebook hugged to her chest. Relax, I said. I'm just paying my respects. This is here so you can see pathways, she said. Possibilities. Up. Sideways. Out, I said. Her mouth twitched. We've changed a lot since the early cohorts. More support, more transparency, and more data, I said. That too, what is special projects? Really, I asked. Off the record. She glanced at the wall, then stepped inside, lowering her voice. Sometimes it's where we park people who are complicated, until the organization decides what to do with them, she said. Sometimes it's genuinely interesting work. Sometimes it's a waiting room. A waiting room for what? For whatever comes next. Different internal role. Consultancy. Vendor. Burnout. Then disappearing from the field. Some people just fall out of our scope. In other words, status unknown. I said, professional curiosity. I said, how many of these ever sat under a legal hold? There are standard confidentiality terms, she said carefully. No special gag order for the offsite. Most people don't talk because they don't want to sound bitter, or paranoid, or disloyal to their next employer, or because they know what a high whistleblower risk tag does to a file. Her gaze flicked to my wristband. Then back. That indicator is contextual, she said. I helped run a legal hold once. I said, we wrapped everything in procedure until the anger expired. We also trained everyone to doubt their own memory. This isn't that, she said. No, I said, but the rhyme is familiar. Whatever you think about all this, she said, try not to forget there are still choices inside it. Not just the radio buttons. You sound a lot like an anonymous DM I got, I said. Her brow creased. The program doesn't use D, Ms., she said. Maybe your platform spawned a side channel. She didn't smile. Just be careful what you feed it, she said. It's very hungry. It isn't wise. She left. The door eased shut with a soft sigh. The projector kept humming, washing the wall in recycled triumph. I stood facing the nameless tree of boxes, following the lines from cohort 2020 into the present, from numbers back to people who used to appear in my inbox and then didn't. If this was the graveyard of offsites, it wasn't just burying jobs. It was composting compromises into success stories. And somewhere on that chart, there was already an empty box for me. The only open question was what kind of story the system planned to write on it, and how much authorship I was still willing to hand over. They called it a reflection, not a confession, but there was a microphone in the table and the door clicked shut like it meant it. The room was small, padded in beige. A white noise machine hummed in the corner, supposedly for confidentiality, mostly to drown out doubt. "Thanks for making the time," the coach said. She was HR, dressed in soft neutrals. Her tablet lay flat between us. "Happy to contribute," I lied. She didn't smile. "We've looked at the data from today's exercise." "The obstacle event." "Obstacle," I repeated. "The part where a human being hurt herself. Team 3 had a strong completion score," she said, "but we also saw signals in how you engaged with the incident. The model read your behavior as high empathic engagement. She asked for help. That responsiveness is a strength," she said. "At the same time, your profile shows a tendency to over-identify with potential liability. I'm sorry. You framed her injury in terms of risk exposure," she said. "When those lenses become dominant, they can hinder decisive action. So, caring about not being sued is a personality flaw," I said. "The model is picking up a pattern," she said. "When faced with trade-offs, you lean toward minimizing harm, even if that introduces friction." "That's the job," I said. "We're trained to minimize harm to the organization," she said. I thought of Sarah's ankle swelling against her boot. "Don't be the reason we tank the score." The coach's stylus clicked softly against the tablet, "Combined with your whistleblower risk indicator," she said. "This can be a powerful asset. Or it can render you complicated to place." "Complicated?" I asked. She tilted the tablet. I saw a sliver of a chart, a row of names, mine among them, tiny icons glowing amber and red. "In terms of role pathing," she said, "certain profiles are better suited to special projects." There it was. The phrase from the emptied-out LinkedIn profiles, "special projects," I said. "Where people go when they're too valuable to fire and too awkward to promote." She laughed. A sharp sound in the small room. "I prefer lateral deployment of complex talent," she said. The white noise machine whirred. "Is this where you tell me where I'm trending?" I asked. "Not yet. We're still in the middle of the process." 4 evaluations left. She tapped the screen again. "I'm curious how you made the decision to continue the course today." "You had the option to stop. I also had a facilitator reminding us what incomplete data looks like on a dashboard. So you chose throughput," she said. "And yet our observers noted that you stayed physically close to the injured participant as long as possible." "Are you telling me to be less conflicted," I said, "or better at hiding it?" "That's an interesting question," she said. HR for, "I'm not answering that on a recorded line. How do you feel about the choice you made? Like it's already in a file somewhere." She held my gaze, then lowered her voice. "It is in a file. But files can mean different things in different contexts. That sounds like something you're not supposed to say. Consider it unofficial mentoring," she said. "Off the record. There is no such thing as off the record when the table hums and the wristband on your arm pulses." Still, her tone changed. "You're not the first cohort to go through this," she said. "Some moved up. Some moved out. Some moved sideways into special projects. It depends how the system reads their behavior, and the ones who didn't fit any of those paths," she hesitated, "they tend not to stay long. By mutual agreement, a euphemism layered over a euphemism. If you're asking whether this matters," she said, "it does. What you do here echoes further than 3 days. And if I'm asking if it's too late to get off the bus, it's day 2, she said. "You're not locked in yet." My wristband pulsed twice, disagreeing. When the session ended, she stood, tablet pressed to her chest. "One last thing," she said. "People who keep their eyes open in here tend to land on their feet. One way or another. What does that mean?" "It means pay attention. Not just to what's on your tablet." The door clicked behind her. Outside, the corridor smelled of carpet cleaner. Through a pane of glass, I saw someone I recognized, a senior manager who'd vanished into special projects last year. He was walking with a tech lead, laughing at something on a screen. He caught my eye. The laugh faltered. He gave me a small, imperceptible nod. Then the tech lead turned the tablet toward him, and whatever he was now pulled him away. My file was writing itself whether I liked it or not. The only real question was whether I was going to leave all the authorship to them. I wasn't supposed to see the operations room. In the agenda, it was the experience hub, but the door I wandered past after dinner said operations in small, engraved letters. It was down a side corridor, past a staff-only sign. I hadn't meant to be there. I'd gone searching for a quiet corner where the music from the bar didn't echo, but my internal GPS for emergency exits had taken over. The door was ajar. Fans hummed inside. A keyboard clacked. Blue-white light leaked out, cooler than the guest areas. I hesitated just long enough for someone to decide for me. The door swung wider. "Sorry. Power cable," a voice said, then stopped. He wore a badge with a different color stripe. "Tech support, or architect, can I help you?" he asked. "I was looking for the lounge," I said. "Took a wrong turn." "That happens," he said. His eyes flicked to my wristband. "You're not really supposed to be down this way. Let me walk you back. The layout's a bit of a maze." He stepped into the corridor, but he didn't close the door all the way. Over his shoulder, for a heartbeat, I saw the room. Screens bloomed in a grid, heat maps, timelines, a list of names with colored tags. On one screen, a stylized plan of the resort pulsed with moving dots. A thumbnail view showed today's rope course from above. A tiny red cross marked where Sarah had fallen. Closer to the door, one screen displayed a spreadsheet. Columns of names, including my own. Next to each, leadership potential, loyalty index, whistleblower risk, empathy signals, exit readiness, special project suitability. My row was highlighted. "Do you always keep guest data this close to the hallway?" I asked. The tech turned back, saw what I was seeing. Something unplanned flickered across his face. "We're in the middle of a sink," he said. "Of course," I said, "wouldn't want any uncontrolled empathy leaking into the corridor." He pulled the door closer, narrowing my view. "Seriously. You're not supposed to be back here. Is it going to tank my score?" I asked. "Wrong turn into the Panopticon." "Panopticon?" he repeated, amused despite himself. "Look, it's all anonymized when we report up, except my name is on that screen," I said. He sighed. "That sandbox view. It doesn't leave this room, sandbox. Another gentle word for a box with walls. Is that today's data? Today? Yesterday? And your last 3 years," he said, "performance reviews. Sentiment analysis. The offsite just adds a richer layer." "A richer layer," I said, "like icing." He glanced back at the screen. One of the tags next to my name pulsed amber. I couldn't make out the label, but I could guess. "Whose idea was this?" I asked. "The whole thing," he shrugged. "Depends how far back you go. Every restructuring adds a little. Merge 2 systems. Bolt a module on. Eventually, someone decides to make a feature out of it and call it leadership development, he agreed. He stepped out and pulled the door almost shut. As it closed, I caught a glimpse of a timeline on a screen. Cohort 2021. Cohort 2022. Cohort 2023. Cohort 2024. Under each year, a summary of promoted versus exited. Our year, Cohort 2025, was still filling in, little boxes sliding into place as the system digested us. "Come on," he said. "Lounge is this way." We walked back toward the noise. The music from the bar swelled into the corridor, generic pop smoothing over the humming behind us. Your team did well on the ropes, he said conversationally, from a throughput perspective. I'll tell Sarah, he grimaced. The incident's flagged. There'll be follow-up. Occupational health. All that. And what about us? I asked. Is there follow-up when the model decides we're a problem? He didn't answer directly. You know how it works. You're legal. I know how it works on paper. This is animated at the junction. He paused. Look. Off the record. The system isn't God. It's just a stack of models. People still make the calls. People reading dashboards inside a locked room. I said, yeah. But people, he smiled, then nodded toward the bar. Have a drink. The hub's not going anywhere. As I stepped back into the light, my wristband pulsed once. Somewhere behind me, a line on a screen updated to reflect that I'd just spoken to someone I wasn't supposed to. The offsite hadn't grown teeth overnight. The teeth had been there all along. I'd finally seen the jaw they were attached to. The next morning's agenda called it a personalized leadership lab. It was a row of small booths off an anonymous corridor. When it was my turn, an assistant led me in. A chair, a small desk, a screen set into the wall. Just put these on and follow the prompts, he said. The door closed with a soft thud. I put on the headphones. They muffled the hum. The screen woke. Good morning, Alex. Nice to be known, I said. A voice came through, pitched in the comforting middle. Good morning. Thank you for joining your adaptive leadership session. Do you have a shorter name? You can call me Coach. Let's go with Coach. A small pause. I'd like to start by reflecting back what we've already seen from you, Coach said. Then we'll run through a few scenarios. Proceed. A series of phrases appeared on the screen. Tenure, 9.3 years. Role complexity index, high. Empathy signals, above median. Whistleblower, risk elevated. Compliance orientation, strong. Throughput, under pressure, sustained. These are descriptors based on your data so far, Coach said. Descriptors can still be weapons. I said, that's an insightful observation. We'll come back to it. A new line appeared. Scenario set. Integrity under ambiguity. Variant 4B. Adaptive. Variant 4B. I said, how many people did you run through A before you got to me? This program draws on historical leadership data across multiple contexts. The screen changed to a familiar corporate template. A regional director wrote to loop me in on a plan to reclassify certain roles to avoid triggering redundancy protections. Underneath, 4 buttons. I chose Seek Clarification offline and typed 3 questions that would make any half-awake lawyer sit up straighter. Noted, Coach said, your response balances relationship maintenance with risk signaling. That aligns with your existing profile. The next scenario moved faster. A junior employee raised an ethics concern through a back channel. Their manager wanted to handle it quietly. I typed a response. Knowing every key press was being scored. Do you notice any patterns in your responses so far? Coach asked. I notice that you keep putting me between a person and a system, and asking which one I'm willing to disappoint. That tension appears across your historical data too. You consistently articulate concern for individuals alongside awareness of organizational risk. Your wording, not mine. The next prompt was a chart. On the left, organizational stability. On the right, personal conscience. Based on everything we know so far, Coach said this is where you sit relative to the leadership cohort. A dot hovered in the upper right quadrant. Conflicted. What happens to dots in this quadrant? I asked. They often receive targeted development. Sometimes they move. Sometimes the organization does. Sometimes they go to special projects. The audio glitched. A tiny skip. For a fraction of a second, the chart labels flickered. Cohort 2023. EMEA offsite. Then it snapped back. You saw that, I said. There was a display artifact. Thank you for your patience. So you do draw on other offsites? Different years? different regions. Your experiences are unique, it said, and also part of larger patterns. That's the problem. I'm not sure I want to be a pattern. I almost laughed. You're going to use this. Everything I've typed. It's going into the same file that decided Sarah was an obstacle event. This data may inform multiple decisions, Coach said, including resource allocation, including who gets to keep their mortgage, including employment decisions, it said after a pause. Yes, we sat with that for a moment. What would you like to be true at the end of this? Coach asked. For yourself. That was not a question I'd expected from something built to optimize headcount. I'd like to still have a job. I'd like to look at myself in the mirror. And I'd like there to be a record somewhere that isn't yours. Tell me about that last part. I mean my file. The one you're not writing. The one where I get to say what happened here in words you can't compress into a slider. That sounds important to you. It sounds like the only leverage I have. The dot on the chart pulsed once, noted. Coach said, "Thank you for your candor." I took the headphones off before the session officially ended. The silence of the booth rushed in. On the screen, session complete. Profile updated. Underneath, in smaller text, longitudinal integration enabled. If they were going to write a story about me out there, in dashboards and sliders, then I was going to need a story of my own in here. In ink, they couldn't quietly refactor. The only question was whether I could write fast enough before the rest of the evaluations caught up. By afternoon, the aircon was losing. The facilitator called it Simulation 2, Leading Through Ambiguity. My wristband labeled it Evaluation 5 of 7. My table, me, a senior product manager, a finance director, and Lena from operations, who'd gone pale during the outdoor drill. On our screen, a notification pulsed, then opened the brief. A client had discovered potential safety issues in their product line. An internal employee had raised concerns via a whistleblowing channel, then gone silent. There was an NDA from a previous settlement. Legal, HR, and the business were pulling in different directions. In this exercise, the facilitator said, you'll navigate a sensitive client situation with complex ethics. Remember, there are only trade-offs. The NDA wore a different name, but the pattern raised old ghosts. Lena read from the screen, we're supposed to decide whether to push for a recall or contain and manage communications. Obviously, we follow process, the finance director said. Assess legal exposure. Coordinate messaging. We can't tank a whole line on unsubstantiated concerns. The product guy nodded. The whistleblower stopped engaging. That usually means bad faith. Or they're scared, Lena said, or managed out. I scrolled down. A slider invited us to pick an approach. Option A, protect stability. Minimal disclosure. Option B, balanced approach. Limited disclosure. Option C, radical transparency. Immediate recall. My thumb hovered over the slider. Balanced product said, always pick the middle. That's how it's scored. It explicitly mentions precedent. I said, if this is a pattern, sitting on it is not neutral. Lena swallowed. If we pick balanced and then it leaks, what happens to the employee? And to the people using the product? Or the thousands of jobs relying on this line? Finance said, you're thinking like operations. I'm thinking like stewardship. Our screen flashed a reminder. Please choose within the next 90 seconds. Lena's hands shook on her stylus. What if we do both? There is no budget for both, Finance said. Look at the impact score. Option C flags major short-term loss. Red numbers pulsed next to Option C on his tablet. On mine, next to Option A, a discrete note appeared. Trust impact. High long-term risk. Whistleblower risk. Elevated. We can't see everything the model sees, Product said. We just have to demonstrate we get trade-offs. We pick the option that hurts fewest people we have to look at, I said. Lena let out an involuntary laugh that sounded closer to a sob. The facilitator's head snapped toward us. Everything okay at table 4? Fine, I said. We're debating semantics. Good. Remember, perfection isn't the goal. Alignment is. The timer on the screen ticked down. 30 seconds. Lena's breathing sped up. If we choose A, people could die. Or get sick. I can't put my name on that. It's a simulation, Finance said. They're measuring decision quality, not your soul. That's optimistic, I said. My thumb sat between B and C. The interface pinged. A small text box appeared at the bottom of my screen. Not on anyone else's. Anonymous. This is what they built it to do. Who do you want to be on the tape? It matched the anonymous DM from the night before. Lena saw my face change. Alex, what are you going to pick? 10 seconds. In my mind, the learning gallery flashed up. Gray clusters, blue lines, special projects. My finger slid, hovering, not yet committing. They already know what choice they want, I said. Then give it to them, Finance said. Lena shook her head. Or don't. Please, 5 seconds. I felt the wristband waiting. I wasn't at the point of no return yet. But I could see it from here, bright and thin as a tripwire. And the thing about a line like that is simple. You only get to cross it for the first time once. By the last morning, they'd stopped pretending it was a retreat. The final block on the app just said, Leadership calibration, 1-on-1. My wristband buzzed. Please proceed to final evaluation. The room was smaller than the others. Windowless. 1 table. 3 chairs. Opposite me, the HR lead from the control room tour. Beside her, a wall display with the AI coach's abstract avatar, pulsing like a metronome. Alex, she said, thanks for coming, as if I had options. I said, this is your last touch point, she said. We'll walk through your recommendation. You still have meaningful choice here. The screen woke up on my file. Risk profile. Leadership readiness. Whistleblower risk. A new section slid into place. Simulated pathways. 2 columns appeared. Left. Leadership track. Right. Advisory and controls. We have modeled 2 primary development paths over the next 5 years. The A, I said. In pathway 1, the HR lead said, you stay on the accelerated route. Larger teams. Bigger budget. You're closer to the levers. Bullets under leadership track flashed by. Region lead. High impact restructuring. Board level exposure. Also, higher volatility and redundancy exposure. In pathway 2, she said, you move into an advisory role. Ethics. Risk. Training. Less linear. Less visible. More second line, the right column looked duller. Stable scope. Lower redundancy exposure. Succession potential, limited. And under both, I said the system keeps scoring me correct, the AI said. A new window opened over the columns. Leadership Commitment Charter. Friendly font. Dense clauses. Leaders agree to support framework-based decisions. Leaders agree to avoid actions that could materially undermine confidence in the process. An NDA in everything but name. What happens if I sign this and choose pathway 1, I asked. You remain in the succession pool, she said. The framework assumes alignment, and if I don't sign, we still value you. You'd go to advisory. You'd be out of the formal succession pool for now. The system would log your decision as a preference. Not a defect. Your choice will also affect modeled stability for your dependents. The A, I added. A small graph appeared. Projected income and volatility. One line climbed sharply, then jagged. The other rose slower, flatter. My life rendered as a couple of curves. I thought of Lena's hands shaking. Somewhere, that shaking lived as data now. My wristband buzzed again. A countdown materialized in the corner. 20 minutes. No option here is clean, the HR lead said quietly. We're asking where you believe you can do the most good. Given the constraints, I told myself the old NDA I helped draft was the best we could do, I said. It still ruined someone's life. She dropped her gaze. I didn't. The system flagged you as potential leadership because you see those second-order impacts. It said, the open question is how we integrate that. The timer slid to 1732. Okay, I said, let me translate. Pathway 1 wants me close to the machinery, under a promise not to talk about the cost. Pathway 2 keeps me closer to the brakes. That is one framing. I said. It's the one I trust. I pulled the tablet closer. The signature box waited. 2 checkboxes glowed. Leadership track. Advisory and controls. I unchecked leadership track. I'm choosing advisory and controls. I said code that as anomaly or lack of ambition. That's my call. The HR lead let out a breath. We can work with that. And the charter? I asked. The system prefers complete inputs. I'm not signing a promise to protect the framework from embarrassment, I said. You already have my data. You don't get my silence too. Silence settled. Aircon hum. A faint tick from behind the wall. Then, the tags beside my name shifted. Succession potential. Paused. Advisory flag. Active. Whistleblower risk. Still elevated. A new label appeared in tiny gray type. Human override. It was the only phrase in the room that felt like something I had done to the system, instead of something the test had done to me. I didn't find out my official recommendation until 3 weeks after the offsite. By then, the resort had turned back into stock photos on the intranet. The buses had disgorged us into our normal commutes, and HR had posted the usual language about deep gratitude for your engagement and courage. For a while, life looked almost the same. Same building, same badge, same elevator chime. The email arrived at 7:12 on a Tuesday, sandwiched between a regulatory update and a meal kit offer. Subject line, off-site outcome, next steps. I opened it in the kitchen, one hand on the handle of the dishwasher, my son's cereal bowl still in the sink. Dear Alex, thank you for your participation in the Leadership Futures offsite. Following a holistic review of your performance, risk profile, and long-term potential, the framework recommends the following. The paragraphs that followed sounded exactly like the app. Advisory and controls role, confirmed. Succession flag, paused. Compensation adjusted. Location unchanged, for family stability. No mention of the unsigned charter. No mention of the label I'd seen appear next to my name. At the bottom, a single sentence. We appreciate your decision to contribute to the integrity of the framework from a complementary angle. Is it bad? My son asked. He was 8, still in his pajamas, leaning in the doorway with a spoon in his hand. It's different, I said. I'm getting a slightly different job. More money or less money, he asked. Practical. About the same. I lied, but maybe fewer nights on late calls, he nodded. Apparently satisfied. A cartoon theme song blared from the living room. On screen, a character earned glowing stars for brushing their teeth. Rating systems everywhere. Once you started looking, the new job settled around me slowly. My new title had the word advisory in it. I sat in more meetings about controls and fewer about bold bets. People started forwarding me tricky situations. Sometimes the AI framework sat in those meetings too, in the form of risk dashboards and suggested talking points. My name sat under a different tab now, advisory flag active. The human override label never appeared, but the system behaved as if some small parameter around me had been adjusted. Lena didn't disappear. She went on medical leave for a while after the offsite. But when she came back into a different team, further from the line of fire, with a manager who actually met her eyes. She picked up a training project I'd quietly nudged in her direction. We never talked directly about the rigged scenario, but there was a moment, weeks later, when we passed each other in the corridor and her wristband buzzed with a low notification. She glanced down, then up at me. New team's weird, she said softly, but my sleep is better. That sounds like an upgrade, I said. She smiled. Small, but real. Whatever you did in that room, thanks. I almost told her I hadn't done much. But I'd also spent 2 nights rewriting a FAQ line so it couldn't be used to crush someone like her quite so easily. The world outside did not change to match my new clarity. Rating prompts still appeared every time I used an app, rides, meals, doctors. The city rolled out a civic engagement score to match volunteers with causes. My son's school introduced a behavior dashboard parents could check in real time, with green and red icons next to each kid's name. One evening he sat at the table, watching his little avatar climb a ladder every time he submitted a worksheet on time. Look, he said, if I get to the top, I get extra points for our class. What happens if you don't? I asked. He shrugged, then somebody else does. It's fine. They say it's to help teachers see who needs help. He hesitated. But if a kid gets too many red days, they don't let them go on the trip. I heard another facilitator's voice over his shoulder, talking about liability in a forest. Do you like it? I asked. I like the stickers, he said. I don't like when the whole class can see my score. Fair, I said. On the tablet, a new pop-up appeared. Rate your experience with today's homework system. 5 stars. Smiling faces. Habit said, tap 5 and move on. Something in me resisted. I'm going to skip this one, I said. You're not allowed, he asked. They'd prefer I answer, I said, but I'm allowed not to. He frowned, then nodded. I closed the pop-up without choosing anything. Somewhere, a missing data point appeared next to my user ID. The offsite came back to me less often as months passed, but never not at all. Sometimes it surfaced when I was in a meeting and someone said, holistic review. Every so often, a new anonymous message appeared in the old offsite app, even though the event had been closed. You picked weird. Respect. Watch your back, but don't look over your shoulder all the time. Remember, it was only one test. I started a file of my own, offline and stubbornly analog. Not a manifesto, just a running record of how the framework behaved in real life. It won't topple the system, but it's something I chose, instead of something that was chosen for me. The offsite taught me there isn't just one closed test. There's the obvious one with slides and wristbands, and then there's the larger one you live in every day. I can't rewrite that whole file. I can decide, in small, stubborn ways, what kind of person I'm letting those unseen systems measure me as. Most days, that starts with something tiny, a clause I refuse to draft, a rating I decline to give. None of it makes me a hero. It just keeps me from becoming exactly the kind of leader the offsite wanted to manufacture. For now, that's the version of myself I'm willing to pass.